back now into it is something that at this point in time where with the Steelers looking at the idea that they play the Eagles on the 15th, then they play the Ravens on the 21st, which is a Saturday, and already that kind of throws off the week, right? That it's a Saturday and you're not playing on a Sunday, so you have to adjust the training and everything like that. So that throws some things off already. But then after you play a Saturday game, then you look at the next 4 days where you play again on a Wednesday, and then you're really thrown off right at that point where you're playing in the middle of the week where guys are taking rest days usually. Now you're forced to go out there and play. It might not seem like a big deal for anybody that's not really played before, but it's you have to think that these players are such, creatures of habit, obviously, for that to be thrown in there as a bit of a wrench, in this whole thing has to affect all these players in a different way. So that just adds on to the level of difficulty, obviously, other than playing the Chiefs, who are one of the best teams in the NFL. And of course, all considered top five teams in the NFL, the Chiefs, the Eagles, the Ravens, and even the Bengals are a top three offense, you could say. But you know, Pittsburgh is also trying to be included in that conversation, and I think that's the biggest thing, right? They're trying to knock off essentially the Bills for the number two seed in the playoffs as well, because both of them are 10-3 right now, but the Bills have a much more easier finish to 2024 than the Steelers do. I think they play the Patriots twice. They play the Lions this week, and they might play the Jets one more time. But all those teams except the Lions are near top five, top 10 pick in the NFL draft. So they're going to have an easier path to secure the number two seed. So that's also something that the Steelers are trying to do and trying to accomplish this year, obviously, now that this door is open for them, right? With the loss of the Bills last week and the Steelers winning another game. So already tough enough, but the status of George Pickens is also something to kind of bring up here, just because it's really up in the air right now. After he missed the Cleveland game with that hamstring injury, Mike Tomlin spoke yesterday about how he views George Pickens as doubtful going into this Eagles game, that if he was forced to give an answer, he would probably say that George was not going to be able to make it. So that's obviously not great going up against the Eagles. And, not only that, but a hamstring injury is pretty tricky, overall, because, AJ Brown had a hamstring injury, and he's the one receiver that pops into my mind in this thought, where he missed like 3 games, and each hamstring injury is different. I'm pretty sure Nick Herbig missed like at least 3 games, if not two, with his own hamstring injury. So it's a weird spot where it's such a tricky injury that you could come back maybe potentially the week after against the Ravens, but you don't want to risk it. So are they going to hold him off even longer? But can you also afford to lose those games? I know they don't want to just throw him out there because if he's hurt, he does him no good. But, these are important games where, winning them would be huge. And of course, you're going to want to have all your best players there. But that definitely throws a major problem in the operation for the Steelers because even though they beat the Browns and the Browns are a pretty decent team defensively, it's a different conversation when you're talking about the Eagles and how well their defense is playing and the fact that the Steelers are going to have to put up points without their best player, their most talented player, I should say. It's an uphill battle, one that looks almost too steep to climb without George Pickens. So that's also something that we have to throw in there. And without George Pickens, I don't know if they even beat Kansas City or Baltimore. Definitely not Philly because they're playing the best out of all four of those teams. So if you're not going to have George, I don't really think they're going to beat the Eagles. And they have a very talented roster. So to have your most talented player not be there is definitely a huge problem. And, looking at the Eagles, and the kind of things that you have to deal with each of these teams, right? The Eagles bring in a great defensive line with Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Malik Williams, I believe is his name, and Josh Sweat and Nolan Smith also continuing to improve. Zach Bond has been a great player. Kobe Dean at linebacker, both of them have been great. Then in the secondary, right, the Steelers are very familiar with Quinyon Mitchell. He was at the Senior Bowl, and he was seen with Mike Tomlin. Very, very friendly interaction with them, and I'm sure they got to know each other very well. So, they're very familiar with him and how great he's been this year. Plus, Darius Slay goes without saying. Also, we haven't even gone to the offense, right? Dealing with Saquon and AJ and Jalen Hurts and Devontae Smith and an offensive line that is arguably one of the best in the NFL. And then not only that game, but the Ravens and how it's a divisional game. They have a bad pass defense, but you don't want to help them out and have them be in situations where they're not really worried about any of your receivers so they can stack the box even more, bring in more pressure to Russell Wilson, and then your offense isn't really getting anything going. And they already kind of struggled in the first game. I don't even think they scored a touchdown, right? It was all Chris Boswell. So that was with George Pickens. So could you imagine not even having him, what the score could be? That's a real problem, right? Obviously dealing with that. And they have a lot of offensive talent as well on their own. So you're not really going to be able to match it if George Pickens isn't there. Then you look at the Chiefs, right? And you're going to need 7 points. You're going to need touchdowns to beat that team, right? And for a defense that wouldn't have George Pickens to worry about, you can guarantee that Steve Spagnuolo is gonna blitz the Steelers to death if George Pickens is not on the field. He's gonna send like eight guys at least at Russell Wilson and at that offensive line and see if Mike Williams, Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin can beat you one-on-one. And if they can't, then the Kansas City Chiefs are going to have a great day that day, controlling the pace of the game with the Steelers offense suffering. And even though I think the Steelers defense can do a very good job against this offense for the Chiefs that hasn't really been themselves, you can only give Pat Mahomes and Andy Reid so much time before they eventually, get something going. You're not going to hold them really to like 10 points. So, you can only give them that much time before they start to get going. And if you can't have an answer, that's also obviously a major problem. And you can say a similar thing to Cincinnati where, you needed a lot of points in the first game. So you're going to probably need a lot of points in the next time you play. And even though their defense is bad, same thing with the Ravens pass defense, right? It's going to look a lot better if they're not, having guys over the top, if they're playing everybody a lot closer. You're going to struggle a lot more. So the next couple of games were always going to be tough, right? It was never going to just be a cakewalk just because George was going to play. But now that Pickens is injured and it is a hamstring injury of all injuries, you don't really know what the status of each game is going to be because you don't know when he's going to come back. So to me, if I was going to predict a record over these next 4 games, I would probably say because I'm anticipating George to come back relatively soon. I don't think he's going to play. I don't think he's going to play against the Eagles just based on what everybody's saying. So, because of that, I think they're going to lose to the Eagles against the Ravens. George might not play. It's going to be close, but I don't know. I would find it very hard to believe that the Ravens get swept again by the Steelers. I mean, Lamar hasn't been great against them, but you would have to really convince me. And really, I'd have to see it because if I don't see it, I can't believe it. So I'm going to think the Steelers are going to lose to the Ravens after the Eagles. And then at that point, I'm expecting George to come back. And with George, I think the Steelers can beat the Chiefs. I really do. With having George there, if he's close to 100%, then throwing him out there, having him do his thing, and the way Russ is playing, I believe they can beat the Chiefs, especially because they're having trouble with their offensive line. So I think that could be a game where they could win in the most unlikely of scenarios, right? After losing the two previous games and then going out there and defeating the Chiefs. And then at that point, after beating the Chiefs, I know they can beat the Bengals again. So I'm saying 2-2. I think the Steelers are going to go 2-2 over the next 4 games. Hopefully George comes back when I kind of predicted, but we'll see. We're definitely going to see how good this defense really is against the Eagles and Saquon and Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs. And also, we're going to see how good this offense is without George Pickens. Is Mike Williams going to play a lot more to kind of validate that trade? Is the running game with Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren really just going to take over games? Or are they going to be able to do that with a young offensive line? We're going to learn a lot about the Steelers over the next 4 games, with or without George Pickens, right? These games were always going to be the toughest part of their schedule. So we shall see where the Steelers land in the playoffs, depending on how they do over these next 4 games. But we have one more segment to get to on today's show. We're going to preview one of the best games, I think, of the Week 15 slate. The Bills taking on the Detroit Lions. Could this be a potential Super Bowl preview? We're going to answer that and also just kind of break it down as we usually do on our preview. So we'll be right back with that after this break.